it be? With me, your man, Louie Tee. Welcome to the 2018 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series, where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2018 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale: single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series. You cannot tell how these players are going to pan out, and I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in X said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, add up those totals, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer out there, are in total control, as this is the You Pick format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this in future videos in this series, stating two things: the phrase next in the team you'd like to see next. An example would be Browns, next, Cleveland, next, Dog Pound. Speaking of which, the next team up in the series is none other than the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland rocks. At least that's what this draft says. Now, they haven't won a game in 2 seasons. It's been rough. But if anyone can turn this thing around, I think it's this particular group. They've got a nice front office now with guys that understand how to get the job done in terms of picking players. And now it's all about getting the right guys on the field, and most importantly, finding the quarterback of the future, finding that guy. There are plenty of quarterbacks buried in that Cleveland Browns quarterback cemetery. They're hoping that this next guy is the right guy for the job to lead this team into the future for years, many of them to come. Of course, I'm speaking of the first overall pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, talking about Oklahoma quarterback Baker Mayfield. Now, I'm not going to break down Baker Mayfield, as I've already done that here on the Draft Prospects 101 series. So if you're looking for a thorough breakdown of Baker Mayfield, go to the Louie Tee Network, click on the playlist section, and go to the 2018 NFL Draft Prospects 101 series. I've broken down several draft picks already there, including a couple in this particular draft. So make sure you go and check that out. That being said, though, quickly on Baker Mayfield, I think it was a very, very big surprise. This is, to me, one of the biggest surprises at the #1 spot as a quarterback that I can remember in recent memory. We've seen guys shoot to the top of drafts before. That's not uncommon. We saw Eric Fisher come out of nowhere and get the #1 spot in a very weak draft class. But when you're talking quarterbacks, generally, when a guy goes #1 overall, we know who that guy is, and we know that that guy is going to go #1 overall for quite some time, a la Andrew Luck or a Cam Newton, for instance. Generally, we know those guys are going #1. But in a draft where there were a number of different quarterbacks that could have went #1 overall, Baker Mayfield's name didn't come up in this process quite often as the first overall pick. As a matter of fact, he was thought of a guy that could easily fall in this draft, and that was not the case. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary, as he went #1 overall off the board to the Cleveland Browns. The question now becomes, can this guy get it done from the pocket? We saw this guy time and time again carve up college defenses. I've already mentioned that he played in the Big 12. I don't want to harp on that, because when he played against Georgia in the playoffs, he carved them up at points in that game as well. So, look, the bottom line is, we never questioned his ability to get it done. I questioned his size, and I still do. I questioned his maturity off the field, but that's something that I think will come with time. Some guys we've seen come with the maturity over time, and I've always said guys mature at different points of their careers and lives. And I've always said sports is a microcosm of life, and it's no different in the walk of life and in sports with maturing. Some guys come into the league as a rookie, they're ready to go right out of the gate, and they perform at a high level. Others take 2, 3, 4 years into their careers to get it going and the light bulb for it to come on. Same thing in life. And Baker Mayfield is one of those guys that I think just needs to grow up, and I think it will happen for him over time. But the tape doesn't lie, and the tape speaks volumes about this guy's ability to get it done. Now the question is, can that transfer over to the next level? We will see. But it was quite a shock to me that Baker Mayfield was the #1 overall pick. I told you that if you're just going off of tape, his was the cleanest of any quarterback prospect in this draft. His tape was easy to watch. You knew what you were looking at. You saw a guy that was highly accurate with the football, very elusive in the pocket, could create things when nothing was there. That being said, smaller guy, hard to see over the line. You saw some mistakes come from him in situations where he could not see. That's something that I worry about with him moving forward. But look, bottom line is they feel like they got the right guy. And the thing that I love is that they don't have to play this guy right away. Unlike last year when they drafted Deshaun Kaiser and they looked around that quarterback room and they said, all right, who's going to be our starting quarterback? And no one wanted to raise their hand. And sheepishly, Deshaun Kaiser said, well, I guess I'll do it if nobody else wants to. And we saw the catastrophe that followed that situation. That doesn't have to be the case this year. Baker Mayfield doesn't have to play right away. You've got an experienced veteran quarterback that can get you started, and hopefully you have a really good season under the leadership of Tyrod Taylor, and Baker Mayfield never has to see the field this year, and that will set up a beautiful situation of him passing the baton to him next year if Baker Mayfield shows the poise and the preparedness to be ready to take over the mantle next season. But we know how these things go. Generally speaking, he's probably going to end up playing much sooner rather than later. We're probably going to see this guy before the midpoint of the season as the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. But in any event, he doesn't have to start week 1. Barring an injury, I think we're going to see Tyrod Taylor, and that's a good thing for not only Baker Mayfield, but more importantly, the Cleveland Browns, who have not gotten this situation right over the last, how many years? I can't even count. We know all of the struggles they've had at finding the guy at the quarterback position. Nonetheless, in the first round, first overall selection, Oklahoma quarterback Baker Mayfield is.
Hits it high! Hits it deep! It is out of here!
And what was a very unique draft for the Browns, or just in general, this was a team that had 2 out of the first 4 picks in the draft. And then you look at the rest of their draft and just how many picks that they had. If you're just talking the first 50 picks in the draft, they were loaded. And so you knew they were going to be able to maybe stockpile their roster with a lot of talented football players, trade back if they liked. Look, the possibilities were endless for the Browns. They decided to stand pat, and they made another selection at 4 overall, choosing in a surprise, much like the first pick in the draft with Mayfield. Another surprise here in cornerback out of Ohio State, Denzel Ward. So I've already broken down Denzel Ward. I don't really have much to say other than I hope they get this pick right, because I'm not a Denzel Ward fan. You know how I feel. If you haven't heard what I've said about him already, then go watch my breakdown of Denzel Ward on my Draft Prospects 101 series on the Louie Tee Network. But that being said, I think there's a lot of work for him to do on his game, but there's no mistaking the athleticism that this guy brings to the table and the competitiveness that he brings as well. And I think that's what the Browns probably like the most, is the upside that this guy has, because he was only a starter for 1 year, a true 1-year starter at Ohio State. And they're hoping to have the same thing happen for them that happened for the Saints last year with Marshawn Lattimore, who was really a 1-year starter at Ohio State as well. I don't see the parallel between the two. Lattimore, to me, was a light years ahead of where Ward is, and size-wise, Lattimore was a lot better off than Ward. But we'll see. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this guy turns out to be a stud for the Browns. I'm hearing good things about this guy in camp, in terms of minicamp already, and they've already moved him up to the first team. So all seems to be going well now, but again, we'll find out more about this guy once they put the pads on and we start to see live bullets flying around and how he goes up against some of these bigger receivers in the league. We'll see what he's able to do, but nonetheless, in the first round, 4th overall pick, Ohio State cornerback Denzel Ward for me is. So we move on to the second round, 33rd overall selection, offensive lineman out of Nevada, Austin Corbett is the selection. So Austin Corbett is very intriguing because a lot of people projected him to be a guard, as do I, but I think the Browns are going to put him at tackle. And if you look at the Browns situation at guard, they've got one of the best guard situations in all of football with Joel Bitonio and the guard they got from Cincinnati in free agency a couple of years ago. So I just don't see them uprooting what is arguably the best tandem of guards in the league and inserting a guy that is unproven in this league when you know you've got two guys that can get it done at a very high level. I just don't see the rationale behind that. Why create a hole somewhere where there isn't one and maybe be worse at two positions instead of just one, with the departure, of course, of future Hall of Fame left tackle Joe Thomas. So I think that Corbett is going to get an opportunity to start at right tackle. I believe that in my heart of hearts. And Joe Thomas himself said he had a chance to take a look at Austin Corbett, and he said he's got sweet feet, and he thinks he's a tackle and not a guard. And so Joe Thomas knows better than I do. I'll take his word for it. I, however, after watching Austin Corbett on tape, don't believe that he is a excellent choice at tackle. But again, Joe Thomas would know better than me. Let me throw out that disclaimer before I get started with my breakdown. That being said, 6'4", 306 pounds out of Nevada is Austin Corbett. 19 reps of 225, 33-inch arms, which is a problem at the tackle position. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But started 49 of 50 games, was a team captain. So those are all things you'll love as a guy that you know is going to be dependable, sort of what like Joe Thomas was for you over the years. And a team captain, a guy that's going to come in and he's going to be a good locker room guy, and over time may be a voice of reason within that Browns locker room. So we'll see what happens there for this team moving forward. But measurables for Austin Corbett is a pro. Like I said, 6'4", 306 pounds. The 33-inch arms is something that people have a problem with. I didn't have as big a problem with the 33-inch arms, and I've always been a proponent of, hey, until a guy proves to me that he can't, I'm going to give him a chance to prove that he can. So give him a shot at tackle, see what happens, similar to what the Redskins did once upon a time with their selection of what future turned out to be future Pro Bowl, All-Pro guard in Brandon Sheriff. They tried him at tackle. It did not work. They moved him to guard, and voila, they found themselves a future stalwart along their offensive line. That's what I think they should do with Austin Corbett. But nonetheless, the Patriots are going to do the same thing with Wynn. They're going to try him at tackle. If it doesn't work, they're going to kick him inside the guard. I think the Browns are going to do the same thing with Corbett. Athleticism, I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. I look at him move on the football field, and as I told you, Joe Thomas says he's got sweet feet. I look at him, and I see a guy that can move relatively well. He's not a great athlete, but he's better than I think he's given credit for. Running a 5'1", 540, again, you know, that's not the time that you really need to pay attention to. Nonetheless, I think he moves well on his feet. Technique is something that I think he needs a little work on, but I did give him a positive mark here. I did put down in my notes, anxious to see conversion to guard, because I'm not thrilled with this guy out in space. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But maybe he won't be kicked inside the guard. Maybe he will play at tackle, so we'll see what happens there. But anchor, I also have some issues with him with his anchor. However, it wasn't enough for me to make it a negative. Still a positive here, but barely. I put, when threatened by speed, he oversets. That means he opens up his hips too quickly, and then he's susceptible to the bull rush. And so that's a part of the problem that you see when he's a little bit antsy, maybe a little bit gun shy, thinks someone's going to be able to really hurt him with speed, so he opens up a little bit too fast, and then his inside shoulder is then susceptible to the long arm of the law, or the pole, as people call it, where you just stick that arm out. We see guys like Khalil Mack do it all the time, stick that arm out there and just drive a guy back, put him on skates. I saw that happen to Austin Corbett a couple of times on tape, so I do worry about him in that regard. Balance, I think his balance is just fine. Redirect is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, as that is a negative for me. His toughness, I think that's something that the Browns fell in love with. Again, when you start 49 of 50 games, you're a tough guy. And when you hear toughness, you could be talking about on the field, or you could be talking about just mentally, because sometimes you're going to deal with injuries. Nobody is 100% healthy throughout the course of a season. You've got to battle through nagging injuries, and this guy was able to do that starting 49 of 50 games. But you also see a ruggedness and a roughness, and a guy that's a little rough around the edges in terms of his grit when you watch him on the field, getting after people. I liken him to Joel Bitonio, a guy that was just rough and rugged, and you knew you were getting a gritty competitor. Same thing can be said about Austin Corbett. Blocking ability in the pass game, I think it's equal to his blocking ability in the run game. Both of them I have equally rated. I think he's solid at both. Doesn't knock your socks off at either, but I think he's good enough at both. Has a nasty streak, so his finish I do love. And again, I think this is some of that grit that I was talking about. Just to set the record straight, I liked Joel Bitonio more coming out of Nevada than I do Austin Corbett. I actually do not love this selection. I thought there were other guys on the board at the time of this selection that may have been a better help to this football team, especially if this guy ends up having to play guard. If he does work out at tackle, then this was a magnificent pick. If this guy doesn't work out at tackle and ends up having to play guard, then I thought there were better guys on the board at the time of this selection that could have helped this Browns football team than Austin Corbett. But nonetheless, he does have a nasty streak. And I watched him in 3 different games, 3 different years, so I could see what I was getting myself into. Anytime you get a chance to watch a guy go one-on-one against Myles Garrett, you got to take that opportunity. So I went back to 2015, watched him against Texas A&M, watched him in 2016 versus Notre Dame, and then I watched him in 2017 versus Boise State. You saw some nastiness in him in the game versus A&M in 15. Awareness. I put versus A&M, an overload blitz to his side overwhelmed him. It was one of those situations where they came with 3 guys, and it really was one of those situations, 2 to block 3, and it ended up being a jailbreak on his side of the football. I don't think he got a hand on anybody. Kind of, like I said, overwhelmed him, and they were able to get to the quarterback on that particular snap. Double teams, I think he is outstanding on double teams, especially in the run game. When he doubles down on someone, I saw him a number of times collapse the left side of the defensive line, right side of the defense, left side of the offensive line, just collapse that side and give up some huge rushing lanes to his running back. So his double teams are definitely legit. I saw some great double teams versus Boise and Notre Dame, and they had some success rushing the football in both of those games. And even as a puller, he's not the greatest, not the fastest, most agile guy, but he does put in work. Once he does come around that corner and spots a guy, he's able to go and initiate contact. And then, of course, availability. This guy, like I said, was an Iron Man essentially at Nevada, only missing 1 game in his entire career. You go to his cons. Redirect, doesn't change directions well. In my notes I have doesn't change direction well. Foot stuck in the mud versus Notre Dame. There was a situation where he overset to the outside, and there was a stunt, and he went to the outside. They came looping around to the inside, and it's almost like his left foot was stuck in the mud. He couldn't react to what he was seeing. He saw what was happening, and his body was telling him to go. His mind was telling him to go, but his body just wouldn't move. And that guy was able to loop inside of him and put pressure on the quarterback. So that's something that that's why I think he's more suited for guard, where there's less space that he's got to maintain. Speaking of space, spatial awareness is a con for me. I don't love him out in space necessarily. I think he's better in confined situations, which better suits him for guard. And I think some of that has to do with the lack of length. Some of it has to do with a guy that sometimes is heavy-footed. So, again, I would take Joe Thomas's word over mine. If Thomas says he has great feet and that he would make an outstanding right tackle, go for it. But we'll see. We will see what happens. And then that's it in terms of negatives for Austin Corbett. Look, I'm not in love with Austin Corbett. I'm not. I don't necessarily love this pick. I thought there were better guys available at the time of this selection, especially if he turns out to be a guard. If he turns out to be a tackle, then you might have gotten the right guy. He might have been the best available at the time of this selection. But I think he's going to ultimately end up being a guard, and I think there are going to be guys that turn out to be much better at the guard position than Austin Corbett when it's all said and done. So with that being said, in the second round, 33rd overall selection, offensive lineman out of Nevada, Austin Corbett, for me, is... So we move on to the next pick, and like I told you, the Browns were very, very busy early in this draft. Second round, 35th overall selection, running back out of Georgia, Nick Chubb is the selection. So Nick Chubb is a guy with a very decorated career at Georgia. He left the school as one of the leading rushers in school history. The guy was phenomenal while at Georgia, was a team captain, and helped turn that program into a powerhouse. And they're going in a direction where they're going to challenge Alabama for SEC supremacy over the next few years. I think they're really heading in the right direction with their new coach, Kirby Smart. And a lot of those seniors that were able to get them to that national championship game, like a Sony Michel, like Nick Chubb, are guys that are going to, I think, have successful NFL careers. And this guy, if not for the catastrophic injury that he sustained in 2015, I think he would have come out last year and would have been a first-round pick. But nonetheless, you look at Nick Chubb, 5'11", 227. He's a big back. So you look at this backfield, the newly re-signed or extended Duke Johnson. You go out, you get Carlos Hyde in free agency, and now you add Nick Chubb. That is one whale of a backfield, if I may say so myself. And this guy, 29 reps of 2 1/4, which is phenomenal. I mean, I just told you your offensive lineman in Austin Corbett was only able to do it 19 times. This guy almost doubled what he was able to bring to the table. I'm over-exaggerating, obviously, but nonetheless, that's an exceptional amount of reps there. 38.5-inch vert, 10.6 broad, just goes to show you the athleticism in a nearly 230-pound frame. This guy is outstanding as an athlete, better than I gave him credit for when I turned on the tape. And I actually went back and watched 2014 tape of this guy when he was fresh, raw, and as pure a runner as he was ever going to be in college football. Obviously, the devastating knee injury in 2015. And I think he was on a roll. Every game in 2015 prior to the knee injury was 100-yard efforts. He was in a groove. He had figured it out, and boom, the injury came. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But nonetheless, this is a guy that I think you got great value here in the second round on. 4'5", 240 for that frame. Again, 227 pounds at 5'11" is exceptional speed. Quickness, I put down in my notes, quicker than you'd expect. And for a guy his size, he's a little bit quicker than I thought he was going to be. And he's starting to get back to that 2014, early 2015 form. And you could see some of that. I don't know if he'll ever be that guy again necessarily, but he's getting closer to that guy, much closer than he was in 2016 when he was just coming back off the injury. So he's a lot quicker than I gave him credit for. And that's a big help to a guy that big. Acceleration, good acceleration for a plus-size back. And the Oklahoma game is a great example where he carved up that Oklahoma defense. And you got to see some of that acceleration, a couple of big runs, one for a touchdown, one down by the end zone, their own goal line, and he was able to take it, make a nice cut to the outside, and then off to the races he went for a nice 45, 50-yard gain. Got them some great field position there. You got to see a little bit of the acceleration with him there. Agility, solid agility. It's the one thing I'd argue he hasn't fully recovered yet. Yet it's still a positive for me in assessing what Nick Chubb brings to the table. But that's the one thing I tell you, when you watched him in 2014, and I watched him versus Auburn in 2014, and he was outstanding in that game. Then I watched him in 3 games from 2017 versus Vandy, versus Oklahoma, versus Bama. You saw the agility early on in his career where he would string cuts together, make guys miss, and it was just outstanding. And it was surprising to see a guy that big be able to be that nimble and string together cuts like that. You generally don't see that out of bigger backs, yet he was able to do it seamlessly. You don't see that from him as crisply and cleanly as you did once upon a time. I think he's slowly but surely getting to that form, but I don't think he's quite there yet. Vision, tremendous vision, especially once he gets space approaching the line of scrimmage. When you crowd this guy, just like any other big back, you crowd a big back at the line of scrimmage, you make it tough on them because they want to get going. You stop them before they start. That's how you stop a big back. But once this guy gets to the line of scrimmage and there's space and he's able to assess what's going on, he's a guy with tremendous vision. He'll cut it back against the grain. He'll hop step, he'll jump cut, and he'll create extra yardage by setting up blockers and then cutting it back. He's got tremendous vision in the hole. Make you miss. He runs through arm tackles. That's one thing you're going to consistently get, whether it's the 2016 version that wasn't as explosive and dynamic or the 2017 guy that's starting to get it all back. He's going to make you miss via breaking arm tackles. He's a physical downhill runner that will break tackles if you don't come with your hard hat and lunch pail. Contact balance. This is his specialty. Bouncing off of defenders who want to throw shoulders around. He bounces off of those guys routinely and gets yards after contact. That is what makes this guy so difficult to contain, is that you can bottle this guy up in the backfield for a 1-yard gain and he falls forward for 2 additional yards and gets 3. He's the type of guy that you hit him with his shoulder on his knee, he bounces off, sticks his hand on the ground, and instead of it being a 3-yard gain, it's a 7-yard gain. Or you come in, you try to wrap up, you fall off of this guy, and what should have been a 5-yard gain turns into a 25-yard gain. And his contact balance is extraordinary. Toughness and durability. Hasn't had any issues since the 2015 injury, so obviously that's the one setback there. Pass pro and awareness, some things I think he needs to work on. Snap volume, he didn't really carry the load at Georgia at any point. When he first got there, Todd Gurley was there, and afterwards he split time with Sony Michel. He was the workhorse, but Sony Michel still got touches. And even towards the end of his career, Swift came in there. You still had Sony, and then he was getting touches. So he's never really been the guy, and I don't expect him to be the guy at the next level either. And if last year with Isaiah Crowell doing what he did is any indication of how they're going to use their running backs and how your head coach is going to continue to use his running backs, Hugh doesn't like to give guys 20 carries. We saw Isaiah Crowell game after game punish teams, get right on the cusp of 20 carries, right on the cusp of 100 yards rushing, and not see the football again. So I don't expect this guy to be toting the rock a ton of times. So his snap volume should be just fine. His ball security, he had 8 fumbles at Georgia, but 5 of them came and lost 5 of them, but most of them came earlier in his career. None, as a matter of fact, came in 2017. So while that's a problem, 8 is a large number. None coming in 17 means he's trending in the right direction there. Patience and leg drive are his final 2 pros, both of them exceptional. I think he could be a little bit more patient as a runner, but even so, he's still patient enough to allow holes and blocks to develop so that he can make a cutback and adjustments to pick up additional yardage. You go to his cons, and there aren't many here, but his receiving ability, he's not much of a receiver, but I think he can catch the football. But he's not a guy that I want to throw it to a ton. That's why you have Duke Johnson. That's why you just extended him so that he can be the guy that's catching it out of the backfield. And even to a lesser degree, Carlos Hyde. I don't see Nick Chubb being a guy you throw it to very often in the pass game. His pass pro, I have down in my notes, won't blow you away with his pass pro. I think it's solid, but for his size, I think he should be better than what he is as a pass protector. And so he'll have to get better at that if he wants to be on the field in passing situations, and not necessarily on third down. But, you know, sometimes you want a guy in there on first or second down, but you want to throw it on first or second down. And you still want to be able to trust them to protect the quarterback in those situations. He needs to be a little bit better in pass pro situations. And awareness kind of goes hand in hand with his pass pro. I put he knows who to block in protection, just not always adept at blocking them. And I talked about that versus Bama in 2017 where he gave up some pressure. I think he knows who he's assigned to pick up. I just don't think he's all that great at picking them up. But nonetheless, and then finally, his versatility is something that you know what you're getting when you select a guy like Nick Chubb. You know what you're getting yourself into. He's a first and second down back. He's not going to be a guy that's going to catch it a ton, so he doesn't offer you a ton of versatility. Not going to play special teams. So, again, not going to give you much in the way of versatility. You're getting a first and second down rock toter and a guy that occasionally can help you in some third down situations. But nonetheless, love what this guy brings to the table. Over 4,000 yards in his career at Georgia, nearing 5,000. Team captain. You love the package you're getting here with Nick Chubb. In the second round, 35th overall selection. Georgia running back Nick Chubb is... So this next player here is quite intriguing, if you ask me. Third round, 67th pick overall. Defensive lineman out of the U, Chad Thomas, is the selection. So looking at Chad Thomas, 6'5", 281 pounds. This guy's a massive man. When you see him, he's like, yo, look, this guy looks tailor-made for a 3-4 defense as a 5 technique, as a base 3-4 defensive end, and as a guy that in some obvious passing situations can maybe kick inside and maybe win you a couple of one-on-one matchups versus some guards. I think this guy has immense potential, but he's only going to really make you feel great about this pick if he is able to reach that potential. That's the question, because I don't think he ever really fulfilled his true potential at Miami, and there was questions as to whether he loved football. This guy's a musical talent. He's mastered over 9 instruments musically, and so, you know, the thing I hate about scouts is that they make it seem like you can't have hobbies off the field. Like football's got to be your number one. You know, after faith and family, football's got to come first. And if football isn't first, then they go to the does he love football question. And why can't I love music and love football equally? Why can't I love music, enjoy music, but also love football? Why do I have to pick one or the other? So a lot of people question whether this guy loves football. As you can see in his artwork, when he makes a play, he plays the piano. The guy loves music. Does he love football is the question a lot of people. I don't have a problem with what I'm seeing. I see a guy that hustles on the field. I see a guy that I think just needs to work on his technique. And if he gets some things down technically, this guy could be a stud for you and a steal here in the third round. Let's jump into his breakdown, though. Measurables, I told you, 6'5", 281. His measurables are off the charts. 33.5-inch arms. The guy is a freak. Athleticism, not going to blow you away with his athleticism. I think that's why he's sitting here in the third round. 4'9", 240, obviously not the greatest time in the world for a guy his size. You would hope he'd run a little faster than that. But I put down in my notes, better athlete than combine indicated, not explosive though. So I think he's a better athlete than that 4'9", indicates, but he's not explosive. He's not going to blow you away with the first or second step that's uncanny. He does eat up a ton of ground because he's got larger, longer strides, But that being said, he's not explosive off the snap. But I put this in my notes as well for athleticism. Left unblocked on backside versus Wisconsin. He had a tackle for loss, and I saw him do that a number of times on tape where they left him unblocked because they were running away from him, and he comes from the backside and makes a play. So that usually shows off athleticism there when you're able to be unblocked on the opposite side of a play that goes away from you, and you end up making the play front side as a backside unblocked defender. Hand usage, great hand usage versus Wisconsin to defeat block for a sack. He does not do that enough, however, and I think, and that's going to go to technique a little bit later on. I don't want to necessarily spoil that. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. In any event, awareness. He will run himself out of plays at times. He'll go up the field. I put in the Clemson game. He went up the field a number of times to the point where I said, damn, dude, don't you see what they're doing to you? They're allowing you up the field. They're inviting you up the field, and you're falling for the trap every single time, and they're just running right from where you came. Stop going up the field so aggressively. He finally got the message. By the time he did, it was like 38-10. So I'd like to see him be a little bit more aware, but it wasn't bad enough for me to make it a negative. Point of attack physicality. With his length, he is very stout at the point of attack. You don't see him moved off the spot very well, even when he is double teamed. Redirect, really solid redirect versus Virginia. He's a guy that will change directions, and he hustles. I love this guy. The play that I'm referencing in terms of redirect versus Virginia, he goes up the field. They run the football. One of those times where I talked about him being out of position, going up the field and willy-nilly. They run it right where he came from. The running back breaks a tackle, which slows him down just enough that a hustling Chad Thomas comes from behind. And what was going to be about a 37-yard gain down the sideline was nipped in the bud at 10 because Chad Thomas hustled. So he's a guy that stopped, changed directions, pivoted, went back up the field, got the running back before he was able to turn it back up and make it a big run. Ability versus the run. I think he's really solid versus the run. He can be better versus the run. Pass rush ability. This is what I put, and I referenced this earlier, but I want to elaborate on it now. Pass rushing ability won't win with explosiveness, as I mentioned before, but better technique could make him a viable pass rusher. And what I mean by that is more hand usage. I talked about that beautiful sack versus Wisconsin in the bowl game where he was able to defeat the hands of the tackle and beat him to win and get to the quarterback. If he can learn how to use his hands, he doesn't use them enough. If he can learn how to use his hands because he's so goddamn long, this guy could be a problem at the next level. Not just as a run defender, not just as a guy that's going to clog up the line of scrimmage and be a nuisance and allow linebackers to roam free, but a guy that can actually make plays on his own. If he gets better technique and is fundamentally sound, Chad Thomas, I think, could be a steal for you here in the third round. His motor is outstanding. I talked about the play versus Virginia against Taekwon Mizell, and that was back in 2016 versus Virginia. I talked about that play where he stops, pivots, goes back up the field, and makes the play before Mizell was able to turn back on the boosters and make a big play there. His endurance is fine. And finally, his impact on the game. They drop him into coverage at times. He eats up double teams. So it's not always about getting pressure. 10 career sacks, not a ton for a guy that played his entire career as a senior. Not a ton of sacks there, but a guy, 2 forced fumbles, 26 tackles for loss over the life of his career, team captain. Another good locker room guy that I think is going to have an impact. If the coaching staff is able to coach this guy up, I think you've got something here. In the third round, 67th pick, defensive lineman out of Miami, Chad Thomas, for me, is. So you go to the fourth round, 105th overall selection. University of Florida wide receiver Antonio Callaway is the selection. So I've got to give credit where credit is due. I've told you this a number of times. When I'm right, you're going to know I was right because I'm going to be the first to tell you, God damn it, I was right. But when I'm wrong, you're going to know I was wrong because, God damn it, I'll be the first to tell you I was wrong. And I was flat out wrong throughout the entire draft process. People kept asking me over and over again, where do you think Antonio Callaway is going to land? Where do you think Antonio Callaway? Can you break down Antonio Callaway? And I said, for what? The guy isn't getting drafted. He's not getting drafted. Too many red flags. He didn't play all of 2017 because of being dismissed off the Florida Gators team. He's not going to get drafted. I was wrong. And not only was I wrong, this guy went in the 4th round. So not only was I wrong, I was dead wrong. So for those of you who asked and told me that this guy was going to get drafted, you were right. I was wrong. That being said, here's a guy, 5'11", 200 pounds, out of Florida. The only thing I worry about with this pick for this particular team is, can this young roster and this coaching staff keep this guy on the straight and narrow? That's the thing that I worry about with the troublemaker like Antonio Callaway. You're hoping that a situation where you get a fresh start in the NFL, making money, because I think a lot of his situations stem from lack of funds. But money only makes you more of what you already are, which scares me with this guy. And in any event, is this a locker room that is conducive to making a guy like Antonio Callaway a good character football player on and off the field? I don't know. This is the second year in a row, or second year out of the last 3, that the Browns have decided to roll the dice on a questionable character Florida player. They did it on the defensive line a couple of years ago. They do it again here with Antonio Callaway. Let's break him down quickly. 10 career touchdowns. This guy is dynamic as a football player. There's no denying the talent. That's why the guy got drafted without even seeing a snap of football in 2017. It's because the guy's talented. 3 special team touchdowns, 1 on an onside kick return, 2 more on punt returns, and then 7 as a receiver. So the guy is dynamic. Make no mistake about it. Measurables, he's not the biggest guy in the world at 5'11", 200, but he's not the smallest guy either, so it remains a positive. Hands are inconsistent. He will have the occasional concentration drop. Against Vandy, against Kentucky, I saw the football hit the ground in some uncomfortable situations where, hey, bro, you got to catch that. There's no reason for it dropped there. Simply took his eyes off the football, looking to make a play. You know what I like to say, you can't run and gun and have fun. You can't ball without the ball. And so he's just got to make sure he sees the football into his hands before he looks up the field to see what kind of plays he can make after the catch. Speed. It's ridiculous. 4.41 40. The guy is a flat-out burner. I think the Browns I think it's a consensus in this draft. I think screams Browns are trying to get much faster at receiver than they were a season ago. Because you'll have another pick later in the draft, another guy that just can flat out run. So Antonio Callaway is one of those guys that just flat out run. Suddenness and quickness, he's got that in spades. Acceleration, ridiculous. Got down to my notes. Can flat out run. Versus Bama in 15 on a punt return for a touchdown in the SEC championship game. Ridiculous. Just turned on the burners and smoked everyone, including the kicker. And I know it's the kicker, but he had the angle, and Antonio Callaway just flat out ran right by him like he was stuck in mud. Versus Kentucky on a deep ball for a touchdown. Got even with the corner, left him somewhere back at the bus stop, smoked him, touchdown. So the guy can run, and he's got acceleration and some jets that once he turns them on, not many guys are going to be able to keep pace with him. Route running, the thing I love about his route running ability is he has great tempo to his routes. He's never in a rush. He's not hasty when he's running routes. He doesn't tell you what he's doing. You know who he reminds me of as a route runner? Chad Johnson. You know how Chad Johnson would come off the line of scrimmage and he would give you this jump, step, and then a quick little shake, and then he would get into his route. Similar to what you see from Odell Beckham now. That's kind of what you get from Antonio Callaway. Good tempo and pace. Can switch gears, can go from slow to fast to quick in, just a number of steps. So I think he has great tempo with his routes. Not the cleanest routes all the time, but the tempo is what throws you for a loop as a defender. touchdown versus Minkah Fitzpatrick in the SEC championship game on a slant where great tempo, comes off the line of scrimmage, kind of slow, gives him a shimmy, sticks his foot in the ground, gives him a stick, and gets to the slant, beats Minkah Fitzpatrick inside touchdown. So this guy can run routes. Run after the catch is ridiculous. In my notes, I put turns into a punt returner with the ball in his hands. He had a touchdown versus Tennessee on a comeback where he just turns it up the field, gets one block, and he's gone. And that's what happens. He turns into a punt returner once he gets the football in his hands. Ball tracking, has pretty solid ball tracking skills versus Kentucky, versus Florida Atlantic, some deep ball touchdowns where he was able to track it in the air, go get it, and using that speed to accelerate past defenders and run under the football and go and get it. Dependability and clutchness, I left it as a pro, even though I have questions about him and his hands at times, which I don't know if I want to throw it to you on 3rd and 6 because I've seen you drop the football in some situations where you should have caught it. His versatility is off the charts, however, as a punt returner, a deep threat, jet sweeps, and quick hitters, you know, hitches and wide receiver screens, things where you get it to his hands quickly. He's a problem because, like I said, once he gets the football in his hands, he turns into a punt returner. Sideline awareness is solid, and those are all of his pros. You go to the negatives, he's not a physical guy at all whatsoever, doesn't want contact, isn't looking for contact. So physicality and toughness aren't strong suits of Antonio Callaway. It's just not what he does well. Neither is leaping ability or catch radius. He's just not a guy that's going up and attacking the football. Blocking, I just talked about the lack of physicality. I put down in my notes, a non-participant as a blocker. He's a shover. He's a guy that wants to push you as a blocker. But if you don't stay engaged with a defensive back, he's just going to go make the play. And he's a guy that wants to push you in the running game. He doesn't want to engage. He just wants to push you. And if you allow him to push you, then he'll push you right out of the play. But if you're not having any of that, then you'll get into the play and make a play if you want to. And finally, production. He lacks massive collegiate production, obviously only playing in 2 years and not playing in 2017. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room, character concerns. This guy was in trouble on the campus of Florida for weed, sexual assault accusations that were dropped. That was a shady situation where the guy handling the case and hearing it was a booster for Florida. It was a mess. The person that was accusing him of sexual assault said, you know what? I'm in a no-win situation. The guy hearing the case is a Florida booster, has given money to the program. He's not going to believe what I say. So she didn't come forward and charges were dropped. I believe he was probably guilty, but who am I to say? But it was a very shady situation nonetheless. And credit card fraud, which was, I think, ultimately what got him dismissed from the campus. This guy has some issues. And like I said, money generally doesn't make these go away. They make them worse. I hope he gets his life together, and I hope this opportunity he does not take for granted, makes the most of it, and turns his life around. And hopefully there's some guys in that locker room that can help him do that. But I worry about this guy, and because I do worry about this guy, because I didn't have tape from 2017, had to go all the way back to 15 and 16 in the 4th round, 105th pick overall, wide receiver out of Florida, Antonio Callaway, for me, is moving right along, 5th round, 156th overall pick. Linebacker out of Memphis, Genard Avery is the selection. So 6'1", 248 pounds stands Genard Avery. Here's a guy that was quite the player on a Memphis defense that wasn't very good. And they were in a bunch of shootouts. But this guy did all that he could as a linebacker to try to help them be better defensively and hold on to some of those leads and some of those shootouts that they had in 2017. And I watched him in 4 games versus SMU, versus UCLA, and versus UCF twice. Played him once in the regular season and then once in the conference championship. In any event, 248 pounds, that's really good size as an inside linebacker. And so this guy, 26 reps of 2 1/4. Career numbers, 21.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 45.5 tackles for loss, and 2 interceptions. The guy was busy and active as an inside linebacker. So you got to love those types of numbers, especially the sacks, man. They would line this guy up in what they called their cat position, obviously playing at Memphis. They're the Wildcats, so or the Tigers, excuse me, and they called it their cat position, when they would basically line him up at outside linebacker as a stand-up defensive end / outside linebacker and allow him to rush. Hence the big sack numbers for a guy that was primarily an inside linebacker for the most part. In any event, measurables, really good measurables. Speed, 4.59. Not the fastest guy in the world, but you can certainly do a lot worse as a linebacker in this league than a 4.59. That is for certain. Athleticism, I put down in my notes, his ability to dive and get the ball carrier is uncanny. I watched him dive on so many different occasions and get guys, and I was just wowed by his ability to just hit that B button, dive, and be able to get guys on the ground. It was ridiculous, man. I mean, I remember back in the day, there was a game on the Dreamcast it was a football game. I can't remember the name of the game on the Dreamcast, but you could hold down the little trigger button in the back, and you could charge up your dive button, and then you let it go, and the guy would dive as far as you charged up. And it reminds me of Genard Avery. I watched him against UCF on a big run, chase a guy down, and dive as far as he could and get him down after about a 65-yard run. I watched him dive against SMU once to tackle the quarterback, the second time to tackle the running back, and then once versus Tulane do the same exact thing. And I'm just wowed at this guy's ability to dive and get guys down. It's ridiculous. Acceleration and redirect, as well as awareness, are all really solid. None stands out. All just good and solid attributes for Genard Avery. In awareness, I put down in my notes, stays at home far too long on the backside of plays, especially versus UCF on a long run, needs to pinch better. So what I mean by that is your responsibility, if you're on the outside, and Avery lined up everywhere, inside, outside, at defensive end, at outside linebacker, you name it, he did it. They would move him around on their defense, and he would be outside at times, and they would not block him. They would leave him unblocked, and his job is to keep contained on the outside. I understand that. But at some point, you've got to pinch down. Once you see where the run is going, your job is to make sure that the C gap isn't this big, okay? And there were too many times where, in this particular run versus UCF is a great example of him just, he sees it, and he still stays at home. He doesn't pinch down that gap to reduce the size of that gap, leaves a gaping cutback lane for the running back who says, don't mind if I do, who takes the opportunity to cut it back and pick up about 60 yards. Avery, to his credit though, was the one that chased him down, and like I talked about with one of those ridiculous dives, caught him from behind and was able to get him down after about a good gain of 55, 60, 65. But again, you got to be more aware than that. In any event, shed and slip. He's crafty and physical enough to shed blockers. I got versus SMU and UCF, him shedding blockers or slipping them. You love his weight because it gives him enough girth and physicality to be able to take on blockers and then shed them. But he's also crafty enough to slip them, as well. So you get a little bit of both, the best of both worlds with Genard Avery. Taking on blocks, he's sturdy enough to stack blockers, which is what I just mentioned. Tackling ability, he finds the football with good effort and forces a fumble versus UCF. So this was a critical point in the game, the second time around in the championship game. They're trailing, and they're getting their brains bashed in early. And if he doesn't make this play, I think they get blown out, and that game doesn't become as competitive as it ultimately did. They're down like 21-3 early in that game. They cannot stop UCF on offense. They are just moving the football at will. And Genard Avery, I think, makes the play that turns that whole ball game around. Running back gets a nice chunk of yardage on the ground. Avery hustling to the football, gets there and punches it free. That forces a fumble. Memphis recovers. They go down, they score a touchdown. And from that point on, They scored like 21 unanswered points, took the lead. They went back and forth, seesaw affair. UCF ultimately came out on top. As you remember, they ended up finishing the season undefeated and defeating Auburn in a major bowl game. So, in any event, zone coverage, I got him dropped in a hook zone, and he does a great job. He drops in hook zones a ton. I don't see him dropping in any other zone, for that matter. They love to drop him at an angle in the hook zone. Made a great play versus SMU to deflect the football. He dropped into the zone, looked back at the last second, oh, football coming, and deflected it. It was a magnificent play, one you don't see guys like him make very often. And blitzing capabilities, I talked about this earlier. They used him in that cat position, and as a blitzer, he was very adept at getting to the quarterback. I talked about it, 21.5 sacks for Genard Avery in his career. Speaks volumes to his ability to not only line up in that cat position as a rusher, but to also time up blitzes and get to the quarterback as well. And he's got solid range. His range isn't going to knock your socks off. He's not going to go sideline to sideline with his range, but it's good enough range that if someone slows him down or if he takes the proper angle, he can get to ball carriers for the most part. You get to his cons. Here's a guy that isn't great in man-to-man coverage. I don't want to see Genard Avery in man-to-man coverage against anybody. I don't think that's his strong suit. But if you're telling me that's the one thing he doesn't do well, then you might have yourself a really good football player at the next level. In the 5th round, 150th overall selection, linebacker out of Memphis, Genard Avery, for me, is this next guy really intrigues me. Not a lot of experience getting the football. Didn't really get a lot of time to play until his final season at College Station, but made the most of it when he got the opportunity. In the 6th round, 175th pick overall, wide receiver out of Texas A&M, Damian Ratley is the selection. So Damian Ratley is very intriguing to me. And remember earlier when we talked about Antonio Callaway and his ability to run, there's another guy. Remember I referenced another guy in this draft that was going to give you more speed vertically to attack and challenge defenses. Well, here he is. And this is a guy that is a height speed guy. Doesn't classify for the height, weight, speed specimen category as he's only a $190, but for all intents and purposes, we'll go with the height, weight, speed classification. 6'3", $190, guy that's running a 4.45. So this guy can pick him up, put him down. 38-inch vertical, shows you the explosiveness that he possesses. Not a lot of production. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this guy can make big plays. When he does get the football, it's usually in a chunk yardage capacity, 23.1 yards per average catch in 2017, which is huge. 11 of his 30 grabs in 2017 were for 25 yards or more. So again, guy making big plays. So measurables, talked about him being 6'3". That's tremendous. Love it. The 190, don't love it. He actually looks bigger than 190, but he's not. He's 190. You'd like to see him, and I think he will get up to 197, 200 pounds or so. And I don't think it's going to take away nor diminish his ability to run. So you'd like to see him put on a little bit of weight, and I think he ultimately will if he's able to make this Browns roster, or at worst, get stashed away on the practice squad. Hands. I actually was impressed with his hands. Thought he did a really good job of catching the football, man. I didn't see many instances of him dropping the football. Maybe one in there sprinkled in the mix, but for the most part, I was quite impressed with his ability to pluck the football out of the air, use his wingspan to go and attack the football. I was impressed. Speed. Talked about this at the top of his breakdown and analysis. 4.45. The guy can fly. I watched him run past some defensive backs. We'll talk about that here in a second as we get to his acceleration. But this guy can run. Quickness and suddenness, not his strong suit. And generally, that's the case with bigger receivers. They're usually not the most nimble and quick guys in and out of breaks. They're easy to decipher when they're coming out of a break and maybe jump a pass or two. So he's no different. He's not terrible in terms of quickness, but he's not the fastest guy in terms of quickness and suddenness in and out of breaks. Acceleration, this is where this guy excels. I've got a number of instances here in my notes. 2nd and 34 on a blow by, on a go ball for a 77-yard touchdown versus Louisiana Lafayette. Down to the 1-yard line. He got halked at the end. Well, he stepped out of bounds is what he did. Route running, he also had another deep ball that I seen him catch in another game versus Wake Forest. The guy can run. Plain and simple. He can run. Route running, gets solid releases off the line of scrimmage when you don't press him. Okay, when you allow him a free release, you're asking for trouble. He does a good job of, similar to what I said with Callaway, not quite the same tempo, but does a really good job of setting guys up, widening, if he knows he's running an in-breaking route, widening the defensive back to where he can get to the inside and create a little bit of separation. If he knows he's trying to get outside, he stems his route towards the inside to break back to the outside. So he does a really good job of things like that. Nice slant route for a touchdown versus Ole Miss here in my notes. Toughness, he's actually tougher than you would think for a guy that's a $190. Run after the catch, 2 nice runs after the catch versus Wake Forest, including dragging 4 Wake Forest defenders down to about the 3-yard line or so. It was amazing for a guy that's a $190. He was quite determined on that particular play. Also had a nice wide receiver screen versus Ole Miss. So he's one of those guys, he gets the football in his hands and he uses that speed to really make things happen. Leaping ability, high point. I told you got a 38-inch vert. Guy's got long arms, long wingspan at 6'3". He can make some plays going up and getting the football. Catch radius, again, 6'3", gives him an advantage there. Able to track the football in the air. I saw him go get it a couple of times, including that 77-yarder down to the 1 versus Louisiana Lafayette. Blocking, he is not a blocker. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Versatility, he offers you the ability to stretch a defense. That's his deep threat. His versatility is he can take a short pass and turn it into a big gainer, and he can take the top off a defense with the deep ball. So it does offer you a little bit of versatility in that regard. Sidelines awareness, beautiful toe tapping catch versus Wake Forest on a deep fade route where he's able to get behind the defender and track it over the shoulder, get his feet in bounds. Beautiful play there. So this guy makes some plays. I watched him in 3 games versus Ole Miss in 2017, Wake Forest in the bowl game, the Belk Bowl in 2017, and against Louisiana Lafayette in 2017. You go to his negatives and his cons. This guy here doesn't have a ton of physicality. He's tough, but if you put your hands on him at the line of scrimmage, you can disrupt him as a route runner. You can disrupt the timing. He's not adept at getting off of press coverage. He's not physical in the run game as a blocker. Speaking of which, that's the next con. He's not much of a blocker at all. Doesn't help. If he's one of the guys designated to help on a wide receiver screen as a blocker, 9 times out of 10, his guy's going to be the one to make the play and tackle and probably blow that screen up. Dependability and clutchness. He's a guy that I just don't know if you trust because of the lack of targets in a situation. So I don't love him in situations where I've got to depend on him to make a play. And then production. Obviously, 47 career catches over the life of his career at Texas A&M for 921 yards and 8 touchdowns. 30 of those 47 catches came in 2017. 694 of his 921 yards came in 2017. And 6 out of his 8 career touchdowns came in 2017. So while it's a negative because there's not a ton of production there, it's also a positive if you want to spin it and say, look, his best year of his collegiate career came in his final year. He's trending in the right direction. I really like this guy. I think there's a future for him in this league. I think he can develop more as a receiver. He's got one thing that you can't teach. Well, 2 things, really, that you can't teach. Height and speed. And I think that there is a place for a guy like Damian Ratley in this league. And I'm anxious to see him get an opportunity on a young Browns roster where there is opportunity for this guy to maybe make a roster, and I think he's going to help on special teams as a guy that can get down there and be a gunner, which is what he did before getting his shot as a receiver. I think this guy's got a shot. If he can wow them on specials to give him an opportunity to prove what he can do on offense, Damian Ratley is a guy that I think, if not in Cleveland, maybe somewhere else, but I think there's a place for him in this league. In the 6th round, 175th pick overall, wide receiver out of Texas A&M, Damian Ratley, for me, is finally, last but not least, in this 9-player draft by the Cleveland Browns, 6th round, 188th overall selection, corner out of Louisiana Lafayette, Simeon Thomas is the selection. So, if you're going to spend a late round draft pick on a guy, this is the type of player that you want to spend it on. A guy that's 6'4", 190 pounds, long as the day, just athletically gifted, 11'3" broad, 39-inch vert. The guy is dripping and oozing with every measurable you could ask for, except for weight. But at 6'4", with 35-inch arms and 11'3" broad and a 39-inch vert, and oh, by the way, a 4.47 40, what's not to like about Simeon Thomas, okay? This is the kind of guy you spend a late round draft pick on. If it doesn't work, cool, but I gotta know if this guy that's 6'4", with 35-inch arms, that runs a sub 4.5, that has a 39-inch vert and an 11'3" broad, I gotta know if this guy can play football or not. I gotta give him a shot to prove that he can't, because all of this says he's got all the intangibles, all the characteristics of a guy that should be able to play this game at a very high level. So I want to give him a shot. And the reason this guy is sitting here at this juncture is he's had one of the weirdest careers I've ever seen. Check this out. The guy played in 2013, okay, in his freshman year. Then he redshirted in 2014, which is usually something that you don't do. Normally you redshirt your first year and then you go from there. He was bass backwards. He played in his freshman year. Then said, I'm going to redshirt in 2014. And sometimes that could be due to an injury. And you say, all right, you know what? I'm not going to come back healthy enough. Let me just redshirt. In any event, he was academically ineligible in 2015. And then he played in 2016 and 17. So he plays in 13 and doesn't play again for 2 whole seasons until 2016 and 2017. In any event, 2016 was his only full season. He missed some games in 2017 with a nagging injury. So this is a guy that hasn't been able to just play football consistently. But in any event, measurables. I got down in my notes. Long and wiry as hell. I mean, you look at this guy, he's all arms and legs, the kind of guy that you just want to put in zone coverage. You just want to put this guy in cover 3 and just say, don't let anybody behind you, and just be nosy and patrol 1/3 of the field and just get your hands on the football. You're so goddamn long. You're so fast. You can make up ground. You got length. Even if you get beat, you can get back into the play with your 35-inch arms and your 4.47 speed. Just be a nuisance in zone coverage. Speed, I just told you 4.47. You can run. Athleticism, I put that in my notes. Length and athleticism got him drafted, because if you're just going off of this guy's career, it wasn't good enough to get him drafted. I watched him in 2017 versus Texas A&M, but his length and athleticism, and he made like 4 or 5 plays in that game. He was outstanding in that game versus Texas A&M, including a couple of knockaways where I said, that's the length right there. That's the length. He almost made another play, wasn't quite able to get his hands on the football, but it's that kind of awareness and length that's going to give him an opportunity to make this Browns roster. Acceleration, like I said, the guy can run. Anticipation and awareness, it's solid. It's not great. It can be better. Look, locate, and contest. I think he can do that a little bit better as well, but he does it well enough so that it's not a negative. Tackling and willingness to tackle. I put down in my notes, tackles when necessary, but he's not looking for work. So if he feels like everyone else has it, I don't need to intervene, he won't. But if you make it his priority and his business to have to get in there, then he will. Zone coverage, I think he's better at zone than he is man right now. And his length allows him to just do so much in zone coverage. Even when he's late, he's not, because of his length and his speed. It allows him to make up ground. Blitzing capabilities, he's a willing blitzer, covers a ton of ground when he blitzes. I love him as a blitzer. I want to see him blitz more. I saw him blitz twice in that Texas A&M game, almost hit home once. And the amount of space this guy covers with that 6'4" frame is ridiculous. And the amount of time it takes him to get to the quarterback, literally 7 steps. It's ridiculous. And you draft up a blitz that gets this guy free, and he's going to hit home. You go to his negatives. Change of direction and agility. We're talking about a 6'4" frame. Hard to switch and turn that around. He just doesn't have that ability to stop on a dime, change directions, that sort of thing. Ball skills. Only 2 career interceptions. Both came in 2016. I didn't see a ball hawk. I saw a guy that was knocking away passes, not looking to pick them off. Man coverage. I think it's a little bit behind his zone coverage, but it's not something that is broken, that can't be fixed. I think he's got such length and speed. I think he needs to be a little bit more aggressive, and I want to see him come up and press guys. I didn't see him do that enough. When he was in man, he was off and soft. I want to see him come up and be a little bit more aggressive. When he was in man coverage, aggressive and pressing at the line of scrimmage, I thought he was outstanding. And versatility, I don't know if this guy offers you much versatility other than a boundary corner. He's not playing in the slot. I don't know if this guy has the chops to move to safety, and I don't know if he brings any value as a special teams player. So if he wants to make this roster, he's going to have to. But in any event, a little bit of trouble off the field. He was involved in a burglary at school and did face a couple of penalties there while on campus. So that's something to keep an eye out on. But if you're talking about a late round, take a flyer on a height, weight, speed, specimen, athlete type of pick, this is what you're talking about. And this is what the end of the draft is supposed to be about. Guys that may have slipped between the cracks, that have something that you can't teach, and you want to get your hands on them and see if there's something here. And that's what the Browns are going to do in the 6th round, 188th overall selection. Cornerback out of Louisiana Lafayette, the Raging Cajuns, Simeon Thomas is. So a 9-player draft for the Browns. I thought it was a really good draft. There are some questions. I've got a couple of big questions at the top of this draft with the pick of Denzel Ward over a guy like Bradley Chubb, who I just thought was a big mistake. To be able to pair up Chubb and Myles Garrett on the same defensive line would have been criminal. I would have loved to have seen that pairing together. That would have just been so dominant. But they instead go with the corner, Denzel Ward. We'll see how that pans out for them. Austin Corbett, what is he? I don't know. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? Look, I told you Joe Thomas says he's a tackle. If Joe Thomas says he's a tackle, goddamn it, he's a tackle. I think he's a guard. Everyone else thinks he's a guard. We will see what Austin Corbett is for this football team nonetheless. A number of intriguing picks: Antonio Callaway, Genard Avery. There are a number of guys that I think make this Browns draft extremely intriguing. I love the pickup of Nick Chubb to go along with what you have in that backfield. I think this is a strong draft by the Browns and one that can make them faster. Love what Chad Thomas could become. We'll see. But here's what I think of this Browns draft in terms of an overall score. Look, triples are hard to come by these days. I revamped my scoring system, and triples are not easy to acquire anymore. It's a really good haul by the Cleveland Browns. And now the thing is, can you get some of those guys from last year to develop and take that next step in their sophomore seasons? Can you get some of these rookies to come in and prove to be really good picks and give you some production right away? And can you get the quarterback position right? You're hoping, I'm hoping, we're all hoping for the Browns' sake that Tyrod Taylor gives you something in his first season as Browns quarterback to the point where Baker Mayfield can sit and learn and then hit the ground running come next season. But we know how this works. He's going to get on the field sooner rather than later. And I think the Browns have done a great job over the last 2 seasons and even this last offseason of acquiring talent around whomever the quarterback is going to be. You've got a stable run game. You've got a solid offensive line. You, for the first time in a long time, have credible receivers. If Josh Gordon continues to show what he showed at the end of 2017, if you get out of Jarvis Landry what he's given you, given us in this league in his very brief career thus far, if you get some of these young guys to step up, if David Njoku takes the next step at the tight end position, you've got a wealth of riches around whomever is at the quarterback position. But I'm your man, Louie Tee. Thank you for watching this Browns breakdown and their draft wrap up. Got plenty more of these where this one came from, so continue to tune in to the Louie Tee Network. Check out the podcast, Louie Tee Network Podcast, and all of what I bring to the table, including the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. I'm your man, Louie Tee, signing off. Until next time, I'm your man, Louie Tee, changing the game one video at a time. I'll see you next time.